Hey everyone, welcome back to a very special episode of Eyes On, Conversations with Hollywood Filmmakers.
And what's making this very special?
Well, today we have not a crew member. We usually have crew members. Today we have Barbara Ford Grant. She's an executive, has worked with DreamWorks, has worked with multiple visual effects companies, came from animation, visual effects, pioneering technology and filmmaking and how they come together, and is now
kind of a consultant.
Consulting on AI and how AI is going to be influencing Hollywood from the studio system, but also she is a member of the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences, the Scientific and Technical Awards Committee. She's just very tapped into what is happening in Hollywood
and I
on
think
a high level.
The most thing is, and kind of what sounds like her main edict is like, get involved with it.
Yeah.
She's not shying away from it, and because she knows the genie's out of the bottle and it's not going back, and really grabbing a hold of it. So she had some great things to say. We found a lot of reactions with our listeners really lean into whenever AI came up, generative AI or otherwise. So we decided, well, maybe this time around we'd actually focus that and make that the primary conversation.
There's a lot to talk about, and we could have talked to her for a lot longer than we had time for.
Yeah. I think everyone will find something interesting out of this conversation. So here we go with Barbara Ford Grant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. You're nearby, though, so it wasn't a far drive.
I'm local.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, though. I did have to get in a car.
Yes, well, yeah, I know.
It's LA. You have to.
We're not there yet. I guess I would just start out by kind of talking about really your history in this space as it pertains to animation and visual effects. I mean, you've really been in that world of machine learning for years now. And kind of how would you say that delineates now in where we are with like generative AI and what's kind of you've seen all along? Did this is just an inevitable step? It obviously is getting a lot of attention. Kind of take us a little bit through your backstory and your journey, as it were, and kind of where we are right now at the moment.
Sure. I started as an artist. I was an installation artist / digital artist in college who was looking for income and found my way to visual effects, sort of happenstance, because it tangentially used some of the tools I had used in my own work.
Sure.
And I started as a digital background artist, compositor, and map painter, and then got into texture painting and image processing. At the time I got into visual effects, it was very technical. We're all very technical artists, and so you had to program and kind of command line to create your work. And so I have been iterating in both contexts of creative and digital and programming, actually, on the technical side for a little over 30 years.
Yes, we all kind of go on. We don't need to get into that.
And so I kind of watched the aspects that, when I started, there was a handful of digital artists, and it was largely traditional, like miniatures and special effects and optical compositing. And we were kind of watching that transition initially in visual effects. And then when I got into animation, I joined DreamWorks Animation in 95. And it was traditional animation, but we were already using digital tools. Like we had hand-drawn animators and in-betweeners. But then once the animation was done, the rest of the pipeline was digital already.
And what films at that time were you doing?
That was Prince of Egypt.
Okay. Prince of Egypt. Okay, awesome.
So Prince of Egypt was then hand-drawn, but animated by computers? Is that?
No, it was actually animated by hand as well. It's beautifully crafted. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who started DreamWorks Animation, had brought in the best class animators from Europe, from Disney, which was down the road, and elsewhere. And so, what I mean is that they would, you'd have key animators who were drawing out the beats and the styles and designing the characters. And then they actually had, I want to say, hundreds of in-betweeners we had who would draw the in-between frames for the animation. All of that was then scanned, and the rest of the pipeline was digital. So the color, the map paintings, they were hand-painted, and then we scanned them, and it was traditionally composite.
And that was all done here in the U.S.?
It was all done outside Universal Studios on Lake, what is it? Lakeside building, just on the back side of the Universal lot. That's where we were for the first 3 years to make Prince of Egypt.
Wow.
So yeah, everybody was brought in. We used, I think for the first 6 months, we used Ambulance Theater because we didn't have a theater for
Uh-huh.
screenings. And, we'd it was all filmed out. We had a prototype. It was a first laser film recorder from Kodak's. So actually, this is how I got into doing more technical stuff. Is I wound up, when I got to DreamWorks, I tried a couple of different roles, but I wound up writing a lot of the color pipeline for how things looked on the monitor, how we translated it, because the monitor was in a linear space. It was CRT monitors. And so once you scan all this stuff, you have digital map paintings, you have your digital animation, we did, some of the sequences were actually done in early version of Maya, like the water, that prologue scene,
Sure,
the basket
yep,
going
okay.
down. The parting of the Red Sea was prisms, which was like pre-Houdini. So it was the first like massive fluids
Right.
effect. We had all the world's pre-Houdini artists on that. I think there was
Right.
like 30 people working on the parting of the Red Sea. So it was actually, a combination of traditional and digital.
Right.
And part of what I did is sort of marrying the looks to make sure that what they saw on the monitor matched what came out on the film, which was reading a lot of density of film outs and playing with the color matrices to get that to work and match.
Wow.
And it was the color science team in Rochester for Kodak that helped us put that pipeline together. So my history has always been about trying to preserve the best quality. I mean, if I were to give you a theme about it, it's like I really love the cinematic storytelling process, and I'm always looking for how technology not just gets into the process to help us move it forward, but how we can kind of preserve the best quality or push the best quality of it.
Right.
So were you there at DreamWorks? Did you stay on after Prince of Egypt?
I did. No, I left. Actually, that's not true. I left for a few years to do a totally different job because I had studied photography. Before I got into installation art, I did photography. And believe it or not, I spent 3 years in New York in fashion photography.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Which was fun and crazy in the mid to late 90s. And because it was life challenging, I went back to film because it was a much more rational business.
Yeah.
And I went back to DreamWorks. They were working with a company called PDI in Palo Alto, Pacific Data Images, an amazing computer graphics company that had been doing CGI even before Pixar existed. Like they came out of Park Research and HP maybe, or
sure.
Yeah, just
Did they do the Aladdin stuff? Because I remember, that was the first time I remember seeing
I remember that
it.
too. The
sand
the
and
lava in
so
Aladdin.
way
and
before
just going,
that. Do you know
whoa.
the fly through for HBO Entertainment?
Yes. Yes.
That was PDI.
It was.
They did all the early, very early commercials and like logo CG art. So,
Yes.
and then they did Ants for DreamWorks.
Right.
So Ants was their movie. I went up for Shrek, towards the end of Shrek, and I wound up staying up there for 6 years and did on 6 different films, half of them, or 6 different projects, half of them were Shrek related.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it was a lot of Shrek.
Yeah.
Yes.
It was 6 years of Shrek.
So you really saw the bridge from hand-drawn animation into computer.
Yeah, and I bring it up because like all these things, film was still a thing. When I got to PDI, Shrek was actually largely a film release, the first one. So it was like 5,000 film theaters.
And when you say film release, you're saying it's printed back on film.
It was printed back to
Yes.
film on film
Yes.
recorders,
Right.
right? And then by Shrek 2, we had, I don't know exactly how many, but it was in the hundreds. It was mostly film. And then we had a handful, several hundred digital cinema theaters. And it was one of the first to go out in a major release. And, now like
That's
film's
all
a
there is.
novelty, unless you're
Yeah.
doing IMAX, you're Christopher Nolan. And so part of that was learning like a language around what you can do with film or what you can do in any sort of capture, and then what happens to the elements that you can create digitally. And, I started in visual effects, and then I iterated in animation for many years, a little bit of fashion, and then came back to visual effects. I left PDI after Shrek the Third, after 6 years of Shrek.
Wow.
And
It's a lot of Shrek.
It was a lot of Shrek.
Say that
I
6
love it.
times
It was the
fast.
best year. PDI was by far culturally one of the great stories of that era of early computer graphics and film. It was just a great place to be at that time. But then I came to LA to get more involved in R&D, and I went to a company called Imageworks, Sony Pictures Imageworks, because they were doing really interesting things with live action visual effects. They had just done a Spider-Man movie, and I knew they were doing like some of the early digital human digidouble work, virtual production work, motion capture, performance capture, Bob Zemeckis films. And I came and I wound up leading the back-end R&D team. And that team, we did shading, rendering, simulation software, and my first bout with machine learning for facial animation. And back then, it wasn't really AI. It was GAN-based kind of machine learning, where we took fax poses of face. So you have like sort of a codification of what is an emotion. Fax is like if it comes from psychology. I can't
Facsimile or no?
No, there's a particular, and I'm embarrassed, I'm forgetting the guy's name, but there's a professor who created this fax system for different emotions. The human emotion, it was used by the military for a long time.
Sure.
And use that with the performance capture of the talent to direct drive a CG character facial animation.
Got it. Okay.
Right? So that was kind of my first context with it, is doing all this training on these two things and then using an adversarial network to kind of create the best performance, error handling to a best performance. And it was okay in the early days, right? And then we iterated there. The other piece that I was involved with, which I was really interested in, is getting photorealistic rendering of humans. And they had done work with Paul Devevic in the ICT lab to do light stage capture of facial appearance. Initially for just it was used for image-based lighting and rendering to kind of get the look, but eventually it became, if you look at Paul Debevic's work now at Eyeline, it's like performance-driven capture, which is just amazing. And so I think from my perspective, and after I went from there to Digital Domain, which is well known
visual effects.
Benjamin Button, and then Thanos is the character, and they've done just amazing things with character animation and visual effects. And from there, I went to HBO, which at the time I came into HBO, they were transitioning from really beloved, broadcast quality series to visual effects heavy series. I would argue some of the work that was done on Game of Thrones and Westworld is of theatrical quality.
Oh, for sure. Definitely.
So in my mind, in some ways, it's been sort of along a continuum, just continuing to push and advance what the art of the possible was. On the other hand, and this is where I sort of stepped off a few years ago, I left HBO and I'd done some consulting, and then I wound up taking on the role of CTO for Meow Wolf to build out these two immersive locations. And in that context is when I started playing with generative stuff. And then we used generative audio in the Denver location. I played around a little bit with some like chat bots and generative imagery in Meow Wolf locations. And I won't tell you where they are because that kind of spoils it. But so it got me interested in the tools again. And I was working for a virtual production company. We built the big stage at Trilith and did Mega Opus there.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
So, and continued to evaluate these things and never saw anything at the time. This is like early Dolly and then like early Mid Journey. The quality of it just wasn't useful for most
maybe
contexts.
4 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Okay.
3.5, 4 years ago. Yeah, probably. But could see the potential for it and could use it in iterative context. And I'm a big fan of the idea, I'm not looking for the end answer always, but if it can get me to there faster, like if I can use it as a tool, because there's what you ultimately want to get to with time and money you have to do it. And then there's being able to communicate, because it's a collaborative sport, like where you're trying to get to others. And the faster you can communicate and the more detailed you can be about that communication, the better the outcome's going to be, generally thinking. And so initially I started playing with it as a visualization tool, like pre-vis, post-vis, shot, just kind of like looking at it for ways to plan out how things were going to get done. I realized that it was good for me to be independent, and we can get into the stickiness of being in a big studio and
Mhm.
getting access. And so I took a year off and made my own film, short film, 22-minute film with, I think it's like a little over 300 shots of visual effects. And gave myself no money. We're just going to figure out how to do it.
But
We
this was
used-
something you shot.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
shot. It was
okay.
a live action,
Right.
so a lot of compositing,
Yeah.
and a little bit of character stuff, but animals.
Mhm.
And I used generative tools throughout the process
Mhm.
for depth maps, for generative elements, for tracking, for definitely for all the visualization, and then kind of sprinkling in some other stuff. But more I used it as a sort of an education, like how far could you get? What is
Yeah.
that quality? I mean, I wound up having to do a lot of work, and this isn't a news story, to get it to be denoised without quantized, like to have it
Yeah.
useful in a finished frame. And
Hmm.
I feel like one of the things I notice in conversations with colleagues is that they can get caught up, it depends who you talk to, but can get caught up on where things are in the moment. And it's kind of like the weather in Scotland. You don't like it, just wait, because
Yeah.
there's going to be something else around the corner that
Yeah,
fixes
yes,
that problem or thinks differently about it. And so from those learnings, I feel like what I'd consider the watershed moment is not any particular AI tool, but it's the realization that the thing we've been running on from a continuum perspective is all going to change. It's like we had to rethink the entire framework around it, not just, okay, we're going to replace RenderMan for some pieces of this process with VO, right? It's a little more complex than that. That was a long answer. I don't know.
No.
Many things to parse out in that. I mean, I'd read, of course, you read everyone's got think pieces on this and everything. And one of the things I remember reading was that basically it was through kind of quote unquote Hollywood post-production where this kind of evolved and came out. I'm talking about like the generative, but even on the, on the kind of prompting side where it's not right, we're not actually seeing it, but just in that process. And it kind of made it sound like that's where it came from. And then people took it and then made it for mass consumption.
Is the idea that visual effects was using some type of generative tool much earlier, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Whether it be digital extras or...
I mean, the signal to noise on all of this is just crazy.
Right.
It's hard.
Clear it up for us.
Yeah, no, I don't know that I can, but I can try and parse a few things. Computer graphics and visual effects, CG animation, have had a long history, right, together, a symbiotic relationship that goes way back to motion control, probably before motion control camp, but I'll think back to Star Wars, right? When Ed Catmull published the subdivision surfaces paper, it was like 1978. Toy Story, which used it, the first CG animated feature, was 19 years later. Like that cycle to realization in motion picture took a really long time, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Now you'll see like neural radiance fields papers that are implemented into projects months later.
Wow.
Like it's just evolved so fast, the rate of consumption and I think that's the thing that I would point to visual effects and has done to computer graphics, right?
Right.
And not just visual effects, computer graphics, because in games, there are
Unreal
a few
Engine, all of that.
Yeah, that's all kind of fed into this way of being able to imagine and iterate and render. And now in real time, a lot of that stuff's in real time, right?
So that speed of progress that we're seeing right now, is that the watershed moment that you feel that we're in? Is that we're at a time where the technology is improving so quickly that the problems that are presented today are solved in 6 months to a year?
That we don't know how, because I think like getting back to the amount of time, like you go to if you went to a SIGGRAPH and even 10 years ago and you watch somebody talk about a muscle system, oh, that's cool, I'm going to try that for my movie in a couple of years. That's not going to happen now. It's going to be, within days, people are implementing these things. And it's because it's everyone has access. It's not just ILM. It's not just Weta. Like everybody has access to the same tools now.
But, I guess a big argument is when you're talking about speed Is that the goal? I mean, what's happening to then our deep think, with all this?
Well, I mean, it gets back to sort of the project. Well, not me, but I think generally with practitioners who are not on the edge of retirement and want to kind of understand and figure out how to move forward in this. What I think of the watershed, because I don't think I fully answered that question.
Yeah.
What I think of the watershed is, 10 years ago, if you looked at things that were happening, that people were prototyping or that papers that were being released, you would think about them in the context of the way you make stuff today, which is, I do concept art, I model it, with polys, I texture it, I put it into a scene, I, have somebody rig it and animate it.
Yep.
Then it was a long pipeline process. You're probably not going to just assume that's how you do it now, right? You may not need to model it at all.
Yeah.
Is it doing a hero performance? Like there's just a way that we kind of have thought about things for literally decades.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Since
Yes.
since Ed Catmull's paper, where that's just not the default.
Will we be able to license? And I don't know what we're even talking about. We're talking about like nano bits of info that then goes out that becomes the little shine mark on someone's face. That was, I don't know if it doesn't work that, that way, but like, is that going to be possible? I know
Maybe.
Yeah.
That might be. It might be like, what is it? The Wilhelm scream thing. Like you can imagine like, that's something you could license. This is where like from the top down, it gets confusing because they just want, they want a blanket understanding of what it is,
Sure.
how legal should react to it, and what they should put in the contracts. And I don't think it's that simple, right? They're even if you're one of the unions, and I'm not going to speak on the unions at all, but just the idea that there's guardrails you can put in place that help protect workers, and then there's going to be, just like anything else related to the deals, there's going to be what you negotiate for that artist. And that could be that their appearance, their digital appearance is reused case by case with certain contexts and certain.
So this is going to be a whole business in AI attorneys, I'm guessing. And
AI lawsuits.
There
AI
is,
law.
yeah, there's definitely been an uptick in AI litigation,
but also experts, and it's
Yeah.
all new. I mean, there was a lawyer that we were talking to, and he's like, I can't talk about what I even talked about 6 months ago because I'm in litigation about something else that's similar.
Yeah,
So-
and there's not a lot of case law yet,
Right.
right? So there's a whole lot of precedents that needs to be set. So the focus, I imagine there's governance at all levels, right? Whether you're on the labor side, you're on the studio side, distribution, you're agent and manager, there's all sorts of sort of guardrails and governance that needs to be set up. And then there's going to be case law where you sort of prove out your understanding of these things. I mean, there's some obvious things around like that clearly just prompted and made Mickey Mouse or whatever.
I still don't know how a lawyer looks at prompts and can make that decision.
Well, they're looking to say like, did you say I want a Darth Vader like,
If you say, did you say the thing? Did you say the noun?
Because that's a lot of people do that.
Yeah.
Pixar.
Oh, well,
or-
of course.
But this is also sort of the education thing. I listen to those things and I get it. They have to litigate it, right? But I also think about the fact, people spend days, months, years putting together shots that ultimately become a recipe that goes to a renderer.
Correct.
It goes to machines, and the machine
Does it.
executes the entire thing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
frame by frame, sequence by sequence. And so I think there's just going to, this is the first time the world is paying attention to what a computer graphic system does, right? And tries to figure out how to,
Yeah.
find the right side of the law on it. And it's just an interesting time.
How
So-
would that work for, I mean, I'm just thinking, okay, so I'm this independent filmmaker. I've got big visions. I'm going to shoot a lot of it, but then there's a dream sequence that I want
Yeah,
to put together.
Great example.
And what are they, and is there a name for it?
It's called visual effects.
It's called,
I mean,
well, yeah.
The tools you use might be different to get to the end result, but you have plates, you have a human performance, you got to roto them, and you're going to composite some new material into it, but you want that performance, I
Yeah.
would assume.
Okay, then that brings up an interesting point. How much can they actually use what you give them?
Okay, as a sort of studio side person, it's like, oh, they should use as much as they can. As a visual effects side person, like,
We got to start
it's always
over.
reference, like because you want to be able to control, because and it's you might see it as ego driven, but it's really like in the end of the day, the director or the DP is going to come and say, yeah, but I kind of want it to shift this way.
It's
or can you get rid of
exactly
the
what our
blue
VFX
light?
producer
And then
said.
if you
Yeah.
don't have, haven't built it yourself, you're kind
You
of,
don't have,
Yeah.
you're kind of
Yeah.
stuck with what you have, and you have
Right.
to, yeah.
We
work around
interviewed
it.
a
Challenge.
VFX producer. He'd done Avengers. He's done big
Yeah.
movies, small movies. And we said, are you scared about AI? He's like, no, not really. He's like, it's a tool. He's like, but the movies.
He
the
says, I have
directors
clients
worked
that
with-
like futz little tiny pixels. They want,
there's,
and, like,
it's an old term,
you're gonna-
PFing.
yes, but
Yeah.
you're going to ask those people to all of a sudden just be like, okay, good enough. We've pulled this
the
slot machine.
challenge is, you need to be able to control it because you have to plan that they can change their mind and that there are going to be, iterations,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So you might need to wedge it. You might need to show, a variation. And so whether it's a generative tool or you're doing traditional means of rendering it, you have to be, because it's hard sometimes to make those kind of shifts even in
Of course.
traditional.
Right.
Like on a
right.
performance, if
Yes.
it was direct drive animation and they used mocap for it, suddenly you're in a keyframe situation to change it,
Yeah.
right? And so it's about having control. And in where I see that's already happening with AI tools, maybe not, you're not going to go directly to like FAL AI and get a whole lot of great results out of it, but I think in people who know how to make pipelines are already starting to kind of break that apart.
Mm.
And if you can get near real-time iterations, that's huge.
Yeah.
Versus something that might have been in like an 8 or 10 hour render
Yeah.
traditional
Mm.
paths.
Right. So what do you say to the cinematographer or, the actor who like, this is what they're doing, and then you're proposing that like, we're going to see completely, and the stories are going to get good. Oh yeah. And the writer, those very people who are looking at this very, in a binary way going like, I'm freaked out. How do they see themselves participants in that future?
I think it's very hard for people in the same way, the transition from opticals to
Yeah.
visuals, from traditional animation to CG animation, from there's been many examples of analog audio people to Pro Tools, like that
For
was-
sure.
Mhm.
Not getting to know the tools of your craft, it's not a virtue signal. It's not helpful, right?
Yeah.
It's not a good one anyway. Because even if you're gonna rage against that machine, you kind of have to know what the machine is.
Mm.
You got and know how it's being used. And so I think regardless of where you are in this ecosystem, like these tools and this path is kind of already that shift has sailed.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And so
It's just kind of an adapt or die type of thing, right?
well, I think it's more important than that. For me, I think that there's sort of a responsibility. People who really care about the crafts should be very much involved in helping to define what it is.
Yeah,
Yes.
for sure.
And I think it's undoubtedly there will be jobs lost in the business, just in the efficiencies that are created using AI, whether generative or even just the language models. You know,
Yeah. I mean, I'll say something that's probably controversial, but it's just, I've been doing this a long time. And there was a time where in visual effects specifically, like we all knew each other, and then it grew into the thousands. And then we exploded into this industrial complex of shot production around the world where hundreds of thousands of people are doing roto paint, basic compositing. And we sort of created a problem, right? We created a beast that we were going to evolve out of. And what's interesting is they're kind of at the forefront of some of these tools and how you automate these things.
what are you really excited about in the next couple of years that you think's coming up?
Well, I think you mentioned one thing, like I'm curious to see the new storytellers
Mm.
because there was the whole, oh my God, the creator economy is coming for us.
Yeah.
But now they've got like high quality tools to create
Yeah.
stories
Yeah.
too. So I think we're going to see another wave of it. That's like an up-leveled production version of it. So I'm excited to see what happens there.
Mhm, mhm. Is there anything you're worried about over the next couple
All
years?
of it. Are you kidding?
Yeah. Well,
Is there anything you're not worried about? I mean, that's why I keep going back to the sort of the guardrails and the gatekeepers
Yeah.
of quality, like that we'll forget what good looks like.
So in your work with the Academy, you're on the scientific and technical committee?
Scientific and technical awards, yeah.
Technical awards. Okay.
Yeah.
So do you hear any talk in there about the Academy having any sort of moratorium on AI or no AI usage for our...
There are published rules.
Oh, talk to me about those.
Well, I'm not going to speak to the rule
Okay.
because I think it also is evolving too.
Gotcha.
I think that similar to the unions, there's
Mhm.
going to be sort of an iteration process about what is acceptable and what qualifies.
Mhm.
AI is not wholesale disqualified.
Okay.
I think is the extent of it right now. But maybe
That's fair. I guess then talking about...
so the scientific and technical awards are actually kind of unique because they're not like the annual awards where you're kind of the best of in
the
each
year.
of the categories.
Mhm.
They're really about, and often they're like someone's life's work or a body of work over time. It's
okay.
about the impact to motion pictures. So there's
Interesting.
like they move the needle on how movies are made.
Right.
Through some sort of scientific or engineering breakthrough that was novel and specific to movies. It's kind of cool in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like AI could qualify for that at some
Well,
point
not
too.
AI as a category.
I know, but
because
somebody who uses it in a
somebody
certain
who
way.
used it in a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really changed things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the big fear is people feel like they don't, for some reason, have access to it. Like
well,
they feel like
depending on where you are, there's
yeah.
a lot of legal considerations, and people are being told to take stands against it. And it,
Well, I mean, I know we're not going to get into the unions and guilds, but I find like that's a big, I mean, they were on, the Writers Guild being on strike, and it's like, I don't know, I can be kind of cynical with these things. I was like, but all these people, when they're not out picketing, they're rapidly doing it, and they can't work, so they're going to work on their ideas, and they're using this tool. They're being told by their leadership not to do it, so then they're kind of like, oh, I can't really use it, but I'm going to use it because everyone else is saying if I don't use it.
Well, there's that article in Ankler that says like every writer's room now is like run it through ChatGPT, have it take a look, have it organize our thoughts. Not necessarily generating, but
you're not going to stop this from happening.
Yeah.
Right. I think that was the biggest miscalculation on leverage, is the idea that this was just not going to happen.
Right. Well, right.
And so it's having, the more you stay close to the edge of the craft, your ability, like, this is where I say I think it's a big distraction. We should be focused on the craft, what the tools can do to the craft, giving the people who are really good at the craft access to the tools to be able to advance what it is. It's so important because we're sort of in this fear context right now. Lots of people are not even getting access to the tools, or they're having to do it on the down low or on the side. And it's not the most ideal situation, which you kind of want to do because all these tools are moving fast. And they're not moving fast because of Hollywood. They're moving fast because tech companies want them to move fast around the world, right? And so whether we have an opinion or we're going to virtue signal on it or whatever, it's still going to happen, right? And so if you are a production designer, or art director, costume designer, you should be getting access to whatever is going on to see how it helps improve your craft.
Yeah. I'm putting myself in a writer's shoes who's got a great idea for a screenplay, wants to play with the tool, but then is afraid if I play with the tool and put some of my ideas on there, now it's out there and I'm somehow jeopardizing.
Yeah, you have to control. And this is where guardrails, again, going back, like you have to know who's the company, what context is it, like how are you, there's going to have to be rules around all this. Like if you're a writer and you're getting paid to write and they want to copyright that material, what tools you use, where you use it, where that data lives, what the tools have access to see, what they hold in memory, all that stuff's going to matter. And so I think some things are harder than others because of the context they're in. Writing is a very tricky one to navigate, where you probably want the benefit of people who have content security and information security, people who are really auditing exactly what the context
when I look
of
out
it is.
on the playing field, I'm like, is anyone doing that? I just think it's a big thing that then it's all going to this big cloud and they're all pulling back and it's just this boomerang.
In some cases it is. Like, people are running to use these things and you're kind of like, you
giving it
read
up.
the EULA.
Yeah. I don't, is there something you'd have specifically for writers that you would advise them? Like,
I've seen lots of different tools. I do think the ones that are going to have the sort of controls you're looking for are more expensive and tend to come from people in this industry.
Yes.
I don't want to promote any particular tool, but just do your homework.
Yeah. Well, and you were saying earlier that landing and using one tool for all the things is not the way to go to stay in that one ecosystem.
No, like I'll give you an example. Like I use Cloud Code a little bit to to make things. That's like, and I started by just trying to mock things up in Cloud Code, and I've evolved it into this like menagerie of a bunch of, where I'm like planning in Cursor, setting that plan up in Cloud Code, breaking it apart into different agentic workflows. Some of them stay in Claude, some of them go into Figma. They all get checked into GitHub, and it becomes this like multifaceted process. But this is something that I've iterated on over time. And as new tools come in, you kind of figure out how they work in the ecosystem. The most important thing I can say is kind of don't get locked into your understanding of AI as a noun or even a tool as the tool for that particular task. Like learn where things are going. And also, using the writing as an example, like you can imagine people thinking, oh, I'm just going to prompt ChatGPT and it's going to write my script. You probably don't want that. It's not going to be a good script, right? But you might like validate arcs or beats or gags or themes, and you might build things, use it to build out your world, like, historical context or research. In
Show
the
you
same
your
way
blind
that,
spots.
where you would have a team of people in a writer's room do that sort of work.
Yeah.
When we talk to different crew, and we've got all sorts of crew that some of them are very excited about AI and about using it as a tool to build their craft, and some of them are very worried. I have a gaffer who's like just finished a degree in criminal science because he's like, I don't know if I'm going to have a job for a while. And what would you say to that? What would you say to a cinematographer who says, I don't know if I'm gonna be working?
Oh, I do hear that from cinematographers. And I have friends who've actually left the business because it's just so hard to get work, particularly on series right now. There's just less jobs.
And that's not an AI.
That's not
thing.
AI. That's a industry contraction
and sea change we're in right now.
A lot of this,
driven by a myriad of factors.
We can talk about that topic in a minute, because I do think that started long before the AI fear. What artists, cinematographer, production designer, costume designer, what I think about with any of these people, there's the body of work that they've done that you can train on. And then there's how they think and feel about the project they're doing next, which they might draw on work they've done before, but it's not going to be that work. There's going to be their feelings in the context of this new development. And then also the alchemy, as you guys know, of being with people, of collaborating with people, of getting input, of having somebody question something. And that's where I think back to the AI models, they'll get so far. I always use Roger Deakins because he's probably one of my favorite living cinematographers. Is like you can predict maybe something that looks like a Roger Deakins shot piece, but you can't predict what Roger's going to do next. Because if you look at his body of work, it's different every time. Like literally the tools he used, the way he lights it, it's different. And that's what makes being an artist, right? That's the artistry of it. And so that's why I like the idea of breaking these things apart, not having them as this sort of monolithic noun, but as like pieces of a process that you're now using to better facilitate getting to that artistry.
From what you don't have to get into specifics, but with your work with the studios right now, what's their big concern? What are they trying to do or avoid?
That's really hard.
Is it hard
to speak on? I mean, I will say, I think just generally from the studio's perspective, I think there's an existential understanding that the way that Hollywood had moded their work has changed, right? And the ability for 2-5 people anywhere in the world to come up with something and produce something that is of cinema quality means they have to really rethink the business.
Yeah. Barbara, thank you so much for coming out and
this
talking
is awesome.
with us. We really
thank
appreciate
you. I really
it.
enjoyed it. It's nice to meet you guys.
Likewise.
Great to chat, and thank you.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch and maybe we'll have you back, and heck,
could be a whole new conversation
in
just
2
6
weeks.
months.
But thanks, and thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Eyes On How Hollywood Works. Eyes On is hosted by Chris Hanada and Tanner Kling and produced by Simran Porwal Johnson. This episode has been edited by Cooper Bosland. The views, opinions, and comments expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Retrofit Films. This podcast may include copyrighted material used under fair use provisions. All copyrighted materials remain the property of their respective owners.